Hello, friends. How are we doing tonight? How are you? Welcome to the Philosophical Research Society, and for anyone who's here for the last screening of Orpheus, welcome back. Is anyone back who was here the first time? Okay. The power went out partway through the screening, so that's part of why we're back here. So if you missed it the first time, now you're getting a chance to see it tonight. Thank you for coming to the Philosophical Research Society. My name is Alex. I'm a programmer of 7th House Screenings here at PRS, our in-house screening series, as well as a bunch of other events. And who's here for the first time tonight? Okay, a good deal of you. Welcome. Let me tell you a bit about the space. We are in our 91st year at the Philosophical Research Society. That's right. Changed a lot over those years, but it was founded in 1934 by a man named Manly Palmer Hall, who's a comparative spirituality, philosophy, mythology scholar, author, lecturer, and a philosopher in his own right. And he is best known for his work bringing esoteric knowledge from around the world to the West and creating a space where people could look at all of these things side by side and find the truths that resonate for them, see all the similarities between everything, how much more similar they are than different, and just find the inspiration they're looking for. As a 501c3 arts nonprofit, we do something very similar with the arts. We offer a very wide eclectic range of arts programming, everything from monthly Buto dance workshops to monthly comedy nights. We have theater performances, puppet performances, classes, lectures, and workshops on metaphysics, the occult, the esoteric. We have a library that's been here since 1936 with over 30,000 rare books on spirituality and philosophy from around the world. And as a film programmer, I do a very eclectic range of programming, everything from experimental films on 16 millimeter to animation, documentaries, music films, avant-garde, comedies, everything, you know, all over the map, old and new. And I hope that you will come back and join us. Follow us where you follow things. I'm 7th _ house on Instagram.com. On Instagram. Whew. What did you guys do today? I spent all day recreating a 1978 trailer shot by shot for Movie, which is coming up this Wednesday. My brain's a little fried, but Karina Longworth will be here this Wednesday to present a very rare screening of a 1978 film by director Stanley Donen in connection with her beloved podcast, You Must Remember This. The new season is about latter-day films by Golden Age of Hollywood directors. It is a really bizarre and amazing film, kind of a precursor and inspiration to Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez's Grindhouse. It's these two fake 1930s movies, fake trailers, all of that. It's really, really fun. I think it is sold out now, but there will always be a standby line. We are showing Kenneth Anger's Lucifer Rising on Friday this coming week on 16 millimeter reversal print that was unearthed from Kenneth's own collection. I don't know the last time this has been screened, but it is going to look better than ever. And I do recommend, we tend to be able to get folks in, so it's worth lining up. On the 20th, on the 17th, we are showing the great Robert Downey Sr.'s Greaser's Palace. His, I guess they would call it an acid western. It's more of a weed western to me. It's like all spacey, and it's great. And speaking of which, on 4/20, we are doing our first annual animation festival here at PRS. All vintage animation, hand-curated, 16 millimeter digital, all sorts of stuff. It's going to be me, Whammy Analog, EXP TV, and Cathode Cinema, all doing several hours of animation. There's festival passes, there's all this stuff. It's gonna be a fun way to come hang out. Then that's kicking off the following week. We start our retrospective of Hungarian psychedelic animator Marcel Jankovic with his first film, János Vitez. We'll also be showing some of his early shorts. That'll be followed the following Sunday by Son of White Mare, and I think the first theatrical screening of his unfinished film, Genesis, from the 1980s. And we'll be closing with what I believe is the first LA theatrical screening mid-May of The Tragedy of Man, which he spent 30 years making. It is the longest handmade animated film. It starts from the dawn of time until the end of time, and it's badass and amazing. Anyway, I've pitched enough. There's much more to say, much more to see, but you guys know where, and sign up for stuff. So I want to now welcome up the co-presenter for this evening from our very own Surrealist Study Group. This is a Surrealist Study screening. Would you please welcome to the stage Dama?
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to be brief and introduce you to Chloe in a minute. We're going to screen a film tonight, and afterwards have a Q&A for about, I'm going to sit here, for 30 minutes, and I open up to the floor to ask questions. I'm a librarian here at PRS. I'm also an artist, and I started the Surrealist Study Group almost 2 years ago now, since I started working here. And we meet every month in the library, every second Friday of the month, and we focus on studies of surrealism from past to present. So we do have contemporary artists that we talk about, and we match them with someone from the past. I focus on women artists, and Jean Cocteau is an exception to my programming. But the reason Jean Cocteau has been so important to us at the group, and to me as an artist as well, is his insistence in talking about the poet in us. Insistence in also sharing his own shadows with us. And I think he did that brilliantly, and he's still so relevant today. And we're still so impressed by his work today. And politically speaking, too, he was also a gay man who lived in France during World War II. He was persecuted, and he had to save himself from being sent to a camp somewhere. But he made it through, and he made art in spite of it all. And he continued to make art until his last few days. And I'm honored tonight to share this screening with Chloe, who can talk so much about Jean Cocteau. She knows the story of Cocteau inside and out. She inherited the state and now is in charge of also sharing his legacy, and she has a mission to continue to share his work as it is deserving of. He wasn't just a filmmaker. He was a poet, a novelist, a dramatist, a designer, a boxing manager, a playwright, and an opium addict. There's a quote by him I want to read to you before I introduce Chloe. And it's a quote that when I was watching the trilogy of Orpheus, which it is a trilogy, this is part 2. We will be screening part 3 sometime this summer, so keep an eye on the calendar. We started with Chloe with The Blood of a Poet, and we're continuing, and we also are hoping to do more programming with her as we move forward. This is the quote. Art according to art, love according to love. Dead languages are dead. One must translate them into all the living languages and help them to hide themselves to do good, just as the devil hides himself to do evil. Jean Cocteau, he wrote this for Art and Faith, which is being published right now. I briefly also want to talk about mythology, as we work in a library here at PRS with a large collection, massive collection of mythological studies around the world, and witchcraft. You can come in and read about fairies, and next to it, you can also read Proust. So it's a really interesting combination of ourselves as humans in this planet, as we have a trajectory of over and over to kind of tend and come back to a cyclical experience of what humanity means. And the library is very cyclical in its essence. And mythology is one way we tell ourselves these truths in whichever capacity that we are able to hear the truths that we hear every day. And Cocteau said something really beautiful that I think it still resonates to this day. And he preferred mythology to history, because history is made up of truths, which eventually turn into lies. Mythology is made up of lies that eventually become truths. So welcome, Chloe. Please, I want to welcome you to Chloë Cassens.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Chloë Cassens. I'm the representative of the Severin Wunderman Collection, which is the largest in the world of works by Cocteau. It lives entirely in the Musée Jean Cocteau in the south of France. And so it's really been the honor of my life to grow up with my grandfather, with his art all around. He was like, I guess, the world's #1 Cocteau fan, if you have the largest collection. And then get to grow up and become enamored with Cocteau myself, and now educate pretty much anyone who will listen to me about Cocteau. And I have to say, if for the people who've not been here before, I have to give a huge thank you to PRS, because PRS was one of the earliest sort of supporters of what I do and my mission, and they've been so welcoming to me and really amazing to work with. I can't thank Dama and Alex enough. This place is really, really special, and it is a 501c3, and I know that we're really in some fucked up times right now, but please consider becoming a member or throwing some money here. It is so important. This place could only exist the way it does here in LA, and I love it so much. So I just have to give PRS a shout. Now, before we watch the film, and for some of you, you're watching it again, but only halfway through because the power went out the first time. We did do a little Q&A in the dark. It was a vibe. But this time the lights are gonna be on, sorry. But I just want to say a few things. I have a platform that I've started called Sacred Monster, www.sacred-monster.com. All essays about Cocteau, about other sort of bits of culture that are interconnected. Highly recommend checking it out if you are a Cocteau fan, or you're just, you watch this film, you become enamored and you want to know more. Writing about him, also other writing about everything from like K-pop to Daft Punk to medieval folktale about a dominatrix to I wrote something last month about getting into a bar brawl with a Nazi. Like, there's really something for everybody, so highly recommend checking that out. I have to plug myself. But that said, let's talk about Cocteau. So, as Dama mentioned, this is the second installment in the Orphic Trilogy. Orpheus was a myth that Cocteau was really obsessed with throughout his entire life. He first wrote Orpheus as a play in the 20s, and it was very self-referential. At the very end of the play, the severed head of Orpheus says, "I am Jean Cocteau, and I live at X address," which was actually his address at the time. That's not happening in this film, but it's still very autobiographical, down to the fact that it was shot in contemporary Paris. You'll see that unlike his previous work, he's shooting not on contained sets, he's shooting on location in rubble from the war. He shot it in 1949, and he was actually originally supposed to shoot it on constructed sets, but his right-hand creative partner, Christian Bérard, died very suddenly during pre-production. And so he had to pivot, and this is his pivot. It's pretty incredible. The other thing to note, it's not a spoiler, but I just like to point it out, is there is a moment at the very, very, very beginning of the film where Orpheus, played by Jean Marais, who was Cocteau's life partner, creative partner, they had this very legendary love story. But Jean Marais and Cocteau had split up, right before they shot the film. And Orphée is walking into this cafe, and he's walking out. As he's walking out, in is walking Edouard d'Hermite, who plays a character named Segeste. D'Hermite was Cocteau's gardener turned lover. And there's a moment between the two that I think, is it acting? Is it real? You can figure that out when you watch it. But anyway, I'm not going to speak too much longer because we got to let Cocteau speak for himself. But anyway, I just think that this film is so extraordinary. It is a masterpiece. I think if you are a fan of people ranging from David Bowie to Morrissey to David Lynch, Kurosawa, Allen Ginsberg, the list is truly endless. The amount of icons who were influenced by this film, who were inspired by this film, and maybe we have icons in the audience who will also be inspired by it. So Anyway, without further ado, Orpheus. So, thoughts? For those who haven't seen it before, you liked it, you didn't like it, you liked it. Exactly, yeah. Some real iconic filmmaking right there.
Who watched this for the first time today? Oh, wow. Oh, okay. Most of you.
Love to see it.
That's pretty amazing.
I have to say, that final shot of them walking into the ruins is like one of my favorite shots ever. And so when the power cut out last time, I was like, oh, we're not even gonna see the best part.
It was a crucial moment.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love just her cape and her, it's just, it's so good.
I wasn't gonna jump right to this, but can you tell the inside story about the costumes in this?
Yeah, so
Thing
there's
you
a little
said.
drama. I mean, you know, French artists, especially back then, a lot of drama, a lot of beef, a lot of feuding. And so there was a main costume designer, but particularly the princess, Death, she was outfitted by Elsa Schiaparelli, who was a friend of Cocteau's, and they designed certain pieces together. But the original play of Orpheus in the 20s, the costumes were done by Coco Chanel. And if you know anything about fashion history, or particularly those two, Chanel and Schiaparelli hated each other. They hated each other so much. One of them, I forget which one it was, but one of them tried, or maybe was successful, like set the other on fire in a restaurant. I'm not even joking. Like it goes, like their feud was really legendary. And so the fact that Cocteau, who was, I mean, he was very close with both of them, but I would say he was closer with Chanel. She really supported him and at times like bankrolled him for decades. She was not happy about this. And like it led to a huge rift in their friendship that lasted for many years. And so, you know, I don't know that the princess would have looked as like chic in a Chanel cape, but we'll never know.
Yeah, the film is really impressive in and out, and the scenes in the wars, like post-war zones in the city, are especially really intense to watch the sequence and to know that those were places that were destroyed by fascists.
That whole zone,
the final scene.
That whole area was actually the military academy. And it had been bombed by the Nazis very early on. And, you know, Cocteau made use of what he had. And I think, like, there exists the pre-production sketches by Bérard. So you kind of know what it was going to look like, but it's really hard to imagine all of that taking place, like, on a soundstage. It's really something else to see them like truly walking into these ruins in a way that like, I don't think you can really replicate that kind of like grandeur and like even like ominousness on a set.
Yeah. Speaking of death coming back, it's a little bit of a twisted myth of Orpheus, because Eurydice in the original myth, for those who weren't familiar, I'm sure most of you are, but like he goes to the underworld to convince them to bring Eurydice back to life, so they could go back. And he couldn't look at her on the way back. They approved of him because he was very charming, but she followed him out, and then he couldn't. On the way out, he looked at her, and that was that. In Orpheus' version, he falls in love with death.
Yes.
And can you talk to us about this a little bit in the way that he also does this film as a self-portrait and at the same time?
There's a lot happening in this film. It's very, very dense. I think worth mentioning is the fact that Cocteau made this when he was 60 years old. And like Orphée in the film, by this point, he was very well known. He was quite famous. some, I guess, would say over the hill, you know, like he was kind of not passé, but like he was old at that point. And there was a new generation of people coming in that he kind of pokes fun of. And I think it's really evident in a lot of his work that he was making sort of by the late 40s and early 50s through when he died. He passed away in 1963. A lot of it is him really reconciling with his mortality. There's a few pieces of writing that he put out, like informally, even just like in his diaries and letters, where he talks about he would look in the mirror and not recognize himself, and he would talk about having a real struggle between seeing an old man look back at him but feeling young in his head. And I think that when I watched this film, this whole idea of like, he's the famous poet, he's an asshole to his wife, like, you know, like he's kind of making fun of, I think, just that whole idea that like genius male artists can like totally, you know, be awful to their partners, and then it's just in the name of genius. But, you know, he also was not the world's greatest partner to Jean Marais, who's playing himself. But he's reconciling that. He's also, I think, thinking about, like, what does it mean to live on past your own death? Like, what does it mean for a poet to exist after, like, you know, their terrestrial form has crossed over? Death has to sacrifice herself for the poet to be immortal. She has to remove herself from the equation. I think that, like, it's kind of this, like, weird meta thing that, like, we're all sitting here, you know, however many years after Orphée, and clearly, I guess he was kind of onto something if, like, he's living on and his work and his poetry is living on. Cocteau famously referred to himself as the poet. He did start out as a, like, teenager and young adult writing, like, traditional written poetry. And then he just sort of, as he branched into other mediums, just called himself the poet of that form. So he used to say that his films were poems that he wrote with a pen of light. And so I think, yeah, like he's really like reconciling with his own mortality at this point, and also like, yeah, what does it mean to be a poet? What does it mean to be in love with death, have death love you, but also to be immortal? If you're immortal, that means death is off the table.
In being the second film, this is like post Blood of a Poet, which it is an introduction.
Yes.
For those who haven't seen it, also it's an introduction to the idea of what poetry even means. And he battles with it, and he goes through the mirror. The mirror is present in all aspects of like realms, because it's the division of realms.
There's a lot of, you know, like my joke is that like there's a Cocteau extended universe where like there's motifs that come up all the time across all of his mediums, but there's also like characters that come across, like that come up and up over and over again. Like Orphice, he wrote this
Angel.
He wrote this epic poem in the 1920s called L'Ange Orphice. So like that's a character that had already existed and was known from a poem that he had written 30 years prior to the film being made. But mirrors, super present. Gloves. In Beauty and the Beast, there's an enchanted pair of gloves that are very central to the plot. Obviously, Orphée, the myth, but also sleeping, because Cocteau was an opium addict. Sleep, like the realm of dreams and where do we go when we sleep, is something that he really explored a ton. He also drew a lot of his lovers asleep. He just like he liked to draw people sleeping. And so, yeah, it's like, in a lot of ways, this film is like a culmination of a lot of his life's work, but also, yeah, this like continuation of a Greek myth, which is kind of crazy to say, like, I'm just gonna take this like thousands of year old story that is pretty set in stone and just like remix it and do whatever I feel like with it.
Yes. He would have done that. And then the poem that you just mentioned that was written for this angel. In the poem, as far as I remember, he's battling the angel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a war between the two of
Yes.
them. And there was a play that also was written prior to the film that was based on the myth of Orpheus. Was the play that he wrote, did he twist the play as well? Was the myth,
I mean,
or it was more central to the original Greek mythology?
it hewed closer to the original mythology. I think it was still a little like tweaked. And again, kind of like what I mentioned in my introduction, the very end of the play, the severed head of Orpheus declares himself Jean Cocteau and like says that he lives at the literal address that he was living at the time. So he made it way more literal and like just spelled it out for everybody. But, you know, I mean, that was in the 20s. And so there was so much life that there was just so much life that he lived between the play and the film that like I could kind of see why he wanted to go back and revisit it and go, okay, now that I'm actually an experienced older human being who can really understand like mortality and poetry, what does this myth mean to me? And
this is also post-fascist take. Yeah.
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about that because the film that he made during the war was Beauty and the Beast.
So he made Beauty and the Beast literally right after.
Yes.
So
Okay.
the war ended in Europe in 1944. He filmed Beauty and the Beast in 1945 and put it out in 46. So next year has a big birthday, 80 years old, or 80 years young. But this was his follow-up to that. And Beauty and the Beast was really kind of like a renaissance for Cocteau. It opened at the very first Cannes Festival. And it was the first time in a real way that an international audience had direct exposure to him, and that really like gave his career a total second wind. And so by the time he filmed this was like he was famous when he made this film. Beauty and the Beast was a little more like he really kind of like knit it together with what he had.
He got funds for this. Yeah.
Budget.
Yes. Because he was also very DIY in budget.
He was very DIY, although allegedly he did spend most of the budget on this on the Rolls Royce.
Yes.
Like a lot of the budget went to just getting a hold of that Rolls, which
Yes.
it's important. You can't fake a Rolls Royce.
Yes. In expecting like to know that he was making a film, but Beauty and the Beast was a kind of like an exorcism, and then jumping onto the second part of the Blood of the Orpheus series. What how much there was a gap there of time that was pretty actually kind of large for his ongoing production of filmmaking. Was that pause in the years that of releasing both films, was he dedicated to the making of other practices? Like what happened there in that pause of time?
He was always doing everything, like over and over and over again. I mean, sometimes it's hard to date certain Cocteau things because it's like he would revisit, he would do things over and over again. Like there's a lot of art relating to Beauty and the Beast where he did his like pre-production sketching and then went back and like kept drawing and kept sculpting and kept doing lots of things. So he was kind of like always on his own beat. And so that sort of 45, 46 to 49, he was certainly doing a lot of other stuff, but truly one of the main things that happened was the collapse of his relationship with Jean Marais and the introduction in his life of Edouard Dermite, who was with him until he passed, and who literally was his gardener, some gardener. But, his personal life was certainly messy, interesting, fuel for his creative practice, for sure.
I mean, he was also a surrealist who didn't call himself a surrealist.
Well, and the surrealists
the surrealists were very the
surrealists were the
complicated
first
relationships
ones,
there.
Yeah, the surrealists were the first ones to say that's not our guy. Like they really, really disliked him.
Also, they were misogynists and also anti, anything LGBTQ. And although they were exchanging partners all the time with each other, they were very much against, heterosexuality.
Cocteau at one point ended up in some hot water where his apartment, he had moved into an apartment building near the Madeleine in Paris. And I forget who lived on what floor, like who was above and who was below, but he had moved into the same building with his best friend at the time, a woman named Valentine Hugo, who they had a falling out right when they moved into the same place, and they lived, one on top of the other. And then Valentine Hugo became the mistress of André Breton, who was Cocteau's #1 hater. And like Cocteau, Breton would send like his emissaries to go like lurk outside of this building and like physically intimidate and harass him. And so he literally couldn't leave his apartment because his former friend / whoever was like sleeping with the enemy, literally like directly below him or directly above him. I forget which it is. And it just was like, again, just very French and very messy. Lots of partner swapping, lots of like, Paris is a small city, but that's a little too small. But no, he always got in trouble with the surrealists. But then also Cocteau had a real sense of humor, which I think is also very apparent in this film. And so he kind of would like fight back in like a prank kind of way. When he first put out Blood of a Poet, the surrealists were very upset that other audiences thought it was surrealist. Like literally they were like, how dare, it screened at MoMA and MoMA said it was a surrealist film and they were like, what? And so so that just sort of kickstarted a lot of beef. But the surrealists, Breton and that whole group, their idol was Sigmund Freud. And Cocteau retaliated by going around town and saying, Freud has seen Blood of a Poet and he loved it. No proof of that. No proof, no evidence. We really don't know, and it really seems like that was just something that Cocteau made up to like just get a rise out of them, but it worked. And so there was just this constant nitpicking, but what's interesting too though about Orphée is it comes at a really interesting time. It's post-war. Truly, the surrealists that had problems with Cocteau, who had harassed him and stalked him and badmouthed him and did all this stuff, like the ones that survived the war ended up patching up with him, except for Breton.
Well, we can talk about Breton in a negative because neither of us like Breton.
Surrealist Study Group or André Breton
Our Surrealist Study
Club.
Group did not follow Breton's lessons on surrealism, that's for sure.
But no, Breton was truly the only one that like went to his grave and still a hater of Cocteau. Yeah. Everyone else after the war, I think they were all like, you know what? We're here. It's water under the bridge. And unfortunately, a lot of them did not make it. So that was something very like significant by that point.
Yes. Many died.
Yes.
Fighting or joined, or just disappeared.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and it's a real, it's an interesting story, the fact that both Jean Marais and Cocteau survived.
Yeah.
They lived in the middle of Paris, not too far from like Gestapo headquarters the whole time. And they were targeted by the Nazis the whole time. And both of them kind of evaded like deportation at certain points. Early in the war, Cocteau had put out a play that Marais starred in, and a like fascist collaborator, newspaper critic had written a review of the play calling it like degenerate art, like used basically every like term that the Nazis used to like go after artists. And Jean Marais read it, and again, as I just said, Paris is small and the theater community there is small, and so Jean Marais read this review, and sticking up for his partner at the time, he said, you know what, if I see this guy, I'm gonna beat the shit out of him, like it's on. And he did see him like the next day at the like one cafe that they all went to next to the theater, and he made good on his word. He almost killed this guy. And he was arrested, and it was this whole drama, and he was like fully on the list to go. And he mysteriously got off of it. And Jean Marais wrote in his memoir that came out in 1975, which was 13 years after Cocteau died, that he found out decades, like after Cocteau died, he found out that Cocteau had written personally to Arno Breker, asking him to save Marais' life, and he did. And so, you know, like...
So that wasn't necessarily his connection to Coco Chanel.
Well, I think it's Coco. I mean, if you look sort of the 2 and 2 that I've put together in my research and knowing what I know is it looks like Chanel was the one who got Cocteau taken off the list. But Cocteau had personally appealed to Arno Breker, saying, I am in love with this person, please don't do this.
And he stayed. I mean, he stayed, decided to stay. Many fled, many left for, various reasons. But
many fled, many also, I mean, Cocteau got in trouble because he still made art. And he sort of complied with the censors and with these bureaucratic boards, which he clearly, you know, is saying something about in this film.
The judges,
But he got his necessary permits and everything to continue putting on plays and working, even though it was much like vastly diminished work. And so a lot of his contemporaries were also very upset with that because they thought, like, why are you even attempting to follow their guideline? You should just be like on strike. But
I love that in this film he crosses in a lot of the archetype of the imagery of the angels and the judges and death, life and death. He's crossing this border of like war zones and how, you know, we're living one right now, and we can relate to so much of the imagery in this film as well.
And even like the poetry that he's hearing on the car radio was a reference to the resistance, who would they would communicate to each other in code via radio. So that's a total direct reference.
That's a direct reference.
That an audience member would have completely understood that. And then also, speaking of Kenneth Anger, whose Lucifer Rising is screening here next week, I'm very sad to miss it. Cocteau and Kenneth Anger were friendly.
Yeah.
Cocteau had somehow gotten his hands on a copy of Fireworks, which is really incredible to think about when that was like an underground gay film in LA, and somehow it made its way all the way over to Paris during the war, and Cocteau found it and contacted Kenneth Anger and flew him out to France, and it was like this whole thing. But these motorcycle riders, it's very early depiction of the motorcycle riders being like the bad guy, or like the ominous portent of doom. Which, if you look at the way they're outfitted in their helmets and their goggles and their pants and, you know, everything, like it's, the bad guys they look like Nazis, you know? Yeah. And so again, like this is really, like it's coded language, but it's not. Truly a contemporary audience would have recognized it.
Yeah, it was so recent after. Yeah. Even though for us today, this looks like also it's a movie shot in the past, but when it first came out, it was very much in the present.
And this was one of the
day.
first times that Cocteau really had put something out that took place in his world as it was then. A lot of it was like fantasy, you know, again, he's coming off of Beauty and the Beast, which is like a total, you know, it is a fairy tale. It's like a total escapist thing. And he's making this in contemporary Paris, as it was. I mean, that whole chase scene is like a Parisian audience would have recognized Place des Vosges and the market and all of these places. Like it was as if he filmed it in Silver Lake, you know? And I mean, even like the Café des Poètes, like everyone that he cast for that group of beatniks were the actual beatniks hanging out in Saint-Germain, you know, Juliette Greco included. But like, you know, imagine any filmmaker going to like, I don't know, like Zebulon or something, and just casting whoever's in there and going, okay, you guys are playing yourselves, go. Like, that's really what he did.
Just turn the camera on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Questions from the audience, anyone? Yes.
Did he dislike those kids? Like, why does Say just want to stay dead?
I think, I think he liked them, but I think he was like maybe a little crotchety. Like he felt like, Cocteau also had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, especially around that time. I think he felt a little bit like, you guys should like me more. But, that said, like, François Truffaut bankrolled the third part of the trilogy, Testament of Orpheus. So that whole generation, I think as much as he is making fun of them, it's almost like grandfatherly. Like, every time I've seen it, I've never really thought like that the animosity towards the young people was like all that like harsh. It's like very like, oh yeah, they're like concerned about their hair looking right. And okay, they're just very passionate about like the hot, young, hip poet that died. Who, by the way, was his boyfriend at the time. So like,
Yeah.
all the way in the back.
I'm thinking a lot about something about the mirror should do better than to reflect what it sees, something like that. I was reflecting back on himself as an artist, and I'm also thinking about the French relationship with death, la petite mort, meaning an orgasm, and what it is to be a poet falling in love with death. You're kind of microdosing death when you're asleep, you're microdosing death when you're oblivion. And I'm also wondering, all of this related, if he would have been reading the work of Roland Barthes at the time and thinking about mythology from that lens and bringing it all together in a nice little semiotic package.
Well, it's interesting because when I wrote my thesis, I wrote about Cocteau, but I used a lot of Barthes in my thesis, and I never thought to like think about if they knew each other or if they had come in contact. I have to believe he probably did, but I'm not sure. Cocteau was just not like the most theory heavy guy. Like he was in a lot of ways very cerebral. The other petite mort, there's orgasming, but there's also laughter. Like when you truly belly laugh, that is also another small death. And I think Cocteau had a very, I don't know what the right word is to use. He had an interesting relationship to sex and sexuality. By this point in time, it's pretty like well documented and assumed that like his opium use had really like killed his sex drive. So he wasn't like, it feels so like wrong to be talking about this, but it's like he wasn't really necessarily like getting it on every day. And so he was, I think, fueling that or using that energy for his art, for his creativity. I think it's also the reason why you do see a lot of levity in some of these works, especially the ones on film. Beauty and the Beast opens with a prologue where he says that he wants the viewer to just pretend like they're a little kid and like lose themselves in the story for the next, hour and change. And so I think that like that approach to, like that lightness, the joy, right? Like I think there's other euphemisms for climax that like involve the word joy, right? Particularly in French. And so I think that, there's other ways to channel that energy. And I think it really was put into his art by this point. As far as a Roland Barthes, I have to look that up. I can't believe I've never done that. I can't believe I wrote an entire thesis about the two and never did that. Other questions?
I have another question, actually. Does he believe in free will?
Cocteau?
Yeah, in this film.
What do you think? I mean, yes or no. I mean, I think it's part of the joy of the film is like having these questions. I actually don't know the answer to that. Kendall getting me with the questions.
Like, what is free will in a world that is controlled by, Nazis?
That's true.
That's
Literally
what he's talking
the
about
definition
too.
of fascism.
Yeah. What is free will?
Questions?
Yes.
I wanted to better understand where the film cut off the first time it was screened, like not like seeing the whole thing. Where did it cut off?
It cut off, it was actually kind of like if it was gonna cut out, it cut out at a really good moment. It cut out when the princess is like jamming the curtains closed. And so like
It was almost like meant to be.
yeah, like it was like she like violently closed the curtains and then boom.
Oh my god.
And everyone was like, is this intermission? No.
I even got nervous because like there's that whole scene that takes place in the dark, even though it's not that long. I was like, it's happening again. No.
So thanks for those who came back from that
Yes.
night. Yes.
Excuse me, the less abstract question of colors, but the ruins are such a part of the look of it. I can't imagine the film with sets, and I wonder, you've, I guess, seen the drawings, if you have any sense that you can sort of evoke what they were going for before that finish.
It was a lot of, I mean, Bérard's drawings, they were definitely like, they weren't super heavy on detail, but it was a lot of like painted brick with, and a lot of his drawings were just sort of these painted bricks with like the princess sort of hooded in a cape. Again, like how, I mean, he did do the set design and the creative, a lot of the creative for Beauty and the Beast, which is absolutely incredible. So I'm sure it would have ended up just as amazing, but yeah, it is really hard to think like, so they were just gonna like paint some wall to look like brick and like, okay, like that was just not gonna give the same effect.
Was it supposed to bring it into a sort of fantasy, like a world, or
I think, I mean, I think maybe it would have just been more, yeah, fantastical and less like grit. But I mean, it is like a great mystery, this like alternative version of Orphée that never was made.
So I think this was incredibly romantic. I think that there is free will when love conquers.
Yeah.
That's all.
Hell yeah. And then,
That kind of like tripped me up when I wrote it down, but I don't really remember when it happened. When he was like going through the mirror the first time, I think he said something like beehives in the glass.
mhm.
Can we talk about that? Like, why is it this imagery of beehives and like,
Beehives in glass.
yeah, I don't know, something like that. I don't know if you guys remember.
Beehives in the glass, when they're talking about,
When he's going through the mirror, he brings up something about like bees. And like, I know this is absurd, and I'm just curious what you guys. Who does?
Ertebie says,
Orpheus says that as he's going, and I think I don't remember honestly, but it caught my attention in this way. Like,
yeah, there's a few phrases in the film where I'm like, that's a bar, but that's an interesting one. I mean, I always love that line where he tells the princess that she burns like ice. It's one of my favorite Cocteau lines, or even that whole, you know, it's funny because like one of the, Cocteau is often quoted greatly out of context. But one of the big quotes that is sort of floats around the internet all the time is, you know, like, you know, what is it, like, life is sculpting me? And I'm like, yeah, they're removing the context that like this dude is getting rocks thrown at him. You know, like he's saying this under duress. But I mean, the beehive of glass, we have to think about that.
I don't remember exactly what it was. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's definitely evocative. More.
What is the significance of the glacier guy?
The window, so he has a window, and there's a line where Ortebise is talking about how he doesn't know he's dead because he's like committed to his day job, and that's like another form of death. So that's really sort of the metaphor there, is he's wandering around the zone and doesn't realize that like he doesn't have to commit himself to his day-by-day life of being like a window glazier, like a window person. I don't quite know what the technical term is. I think I saw questions over here. Yes.
Yeah, so to say that the original myth was twisted, I would say it's a little bit of an understatement. But the character of Herbutis, I don't know, it kind of seems like he's also Orpheus, like kind of like maybe like the Orphée here is the toxic side of Orpheus, and this character is actually like he actually ends up having the same fate as the Orpheus. Ending up in the Underworld.
What's interesting is that, so the original long poem about the angel Ortebise, he really is, it's very clear in that poem that he is both the angel and the devil on Cocteau's shoulder. And so that totally makes a lot of sense when it's sort of this like split identity, two facets of the same person, one advocating for what's right and one that's sort of, yeah, is like kind of toxic and, you know.
Since you mentioned that he kind of looked at himself in a mirror and he sees like the kind of a younger version of himself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe like that's what, is that, do you think that idea is also there? Is that like a self-referential thing where he takes for himself?
Yeah, well, and the other thing, I think, again, there's a lot of like Cocteau lore baked into this. At the very beginning, the cafe owner says, "Étonnez-nous," surprise us, shock us. That's a direct line that Serge Diaghilev said to Cocteau when he was very, very young, when he was like in his early 20s. Cocteau was desperate to work with the Russian ballet, and Serge Diaghilev was the director. And he would beg and beg and beg. And finally, Diaghilev had had enough. And he said, "You know what? Come back when you can shock us. Étonnez-nous." And that was like the start of Cocteau's career in a lot of ways. He came back with a ballet named Parade, which got him arrested. It was so provocative. Back in the day when you could like get arrested for shocking ballets. But, you know, he really like, that was really like the genesis of a lot of Cocteau's career. So there's that, L'Angers de Bise, and also Segeste. I mean, Segeste is a made-up character as well, but Cocteau had a very complicated relationship with a young writer named Raymond Radiguet, who died at 20. And Cocteau was his like mentor. He was straight, but Cocteau was really in love with him, and this guy like definitely pulled on those strings a lot, like definitely used Cocteau's love for him to advance himself in Parisian literary society. And and when he died so young, he had the flu, back when you could also die of the flu, but that also set off Cocteau's opium addiction. He never really recovered from that death, and so he wrote L'Angers de Bise right after that death. That was his creative response. And then also, yeah, we have this character of Segeste who is, I mean, Dermy was not 18 years old. I don't think anyone watching the film would buy that he was a teenager, but he was, you know, this young poet killed all too soon, a stand-in for Radiguet. So that certainly like plays and is a continuation of this like autobiographical filmmaking that Cocteau was doing at the time. I think like.
Last question.
One more question.
Okay.
Mine's a good last question. I'm really, really impressed about you being here and all that you shared. It's such a delight.
Thank you.
I'm super curious about the Sacred Monster project of yours. And like you're taking Cocteau and embodying it into like everyday life now, or what's your main goal and how do you approach using Cocteau in like new ways?
So Sacred Monster, I started about a year ago. It's on Substack. It's, you know, it's a way for me to educate people really from like the ground up on who Cocteau was in a way that like really just sort of holds your hand through every step of the way of who Cocteau was, but going deep, and hopefully people are learning from it. They do have to read, which people don't read anymore. So that's a little bit of my like personal struggle at the moment, is getting people to read. But hell yeah, one person here. No, no, but it is good. I swear, I do try. But no, so it's on the first of every month, like a deep dive into an aspect of Cocteau's career, life, work in an introductory way, just to really like explain what was going on, but also like contextualize it to today, because honestly, I really don't like when people say things that are going on right now are unprecedented, when like everything that's happening right now has a precedent. And a lot of it was precedented in Cocteau's time, down to like, you know, there are quotes that I found from when Cocteau was making art, and he was in the salons of Marcel Proust and hanging out with Sarah Bernhardt. So this would have been Belle Époque, pre-World War I era. And they were all freaking out over the advent of the motion picture, because they thought that it was going to lower the attention span from audiences, for audiences who were like gonna not be able to enjoy a 6-hour opera anymore. And I'm like, okay, well that sounds a lot like people freaking out over like the TikTok attention span, which is bad, but like, it's the same thing. You know, I mean, influencers, Sarah Bernhardt was licensing her face to bouillon cubes. Like, it's all happened before, but I think, you know, a lot of the time, like, people really want to freak you out. Like, if you're freaked out and you're scared, you're way more malleable and you're way more likely to fall in line with this bullshit that's happening, right? And so I just feel like through the via the avenue of what I know, which is Jean Cocteau, it's quite niche, but it is what I know, I can at least like demonstrate to people how like it's okay. This has happened before. We have examples. We have interesting examples. There's all sorts of things that we can like really take and learn from when we see these things. I mean, yeah, like I was at the Louvre last year. They had a big exhibit about court jesters in like Renaissance art. And I went the day that the election results were announced, coincidentally. And like there was a piece of art where literally there was a guy on like a cart pulled by donkeys handing out jester hats to people. And so it's like they all had their matching hat that showed that they were clowns. I think I've seen that one before. And then there was this one category, like there's this one area of art that I'd never seen where it was this woman riding a man and like steering him with his beard and like whipping him. And I was like, okay, like I used to be a sex educator. I was like, okay, I've seen that before. I know what this is, but this is from like 1400, so like what the fuck is going on here? And it turns out that like in the medieval era, there was a very popular folk tale about a woman named Phyllis who, you know, was completely made up, never existed, but the story goes that Aristotle fell in love hopelessly with Phyllis, and she took advantage of him and like basically domed him. And that like and basically the moral of that story was like, oh, like the smartest of men, the smartest man ever, Aristotle, can just fall into the hands of a woman if you're not careful, like beware the wily woman. But she was literally like whipping him and like riding him around. And I was like, this is kink. Like this is crazy. And like, again, nothing is new, guys, but sometimes, you know, people want you to forget that because it, you know, makes you more controllable.
On that note.
On that note.
Thank you so much for coming, y'all. Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you so much, Dama.
And I'll see you in the summer.
See you in the summertime.
Yeah.
Come back.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.